Good morning, everyone, and warm welcome to the ENAIRE Human Factors Days, all the week from 27th of September to the 1st of October. A great event in ENAIRE in cooperation with Eurocontrol and great contributions from the AFA and EUROCONTROL. Today is the first webinar setting up the scene for the rest of the week. And we have aligned a great panel for you, human factors and experts, and of course, Angel Luis Arias, the Director General of ENAIRE. So we are in a setting where your cameras and your microphones are blocked. Interact with us on the Q&A for asking questions to the panelists. For the issues that you may have and salutation, use the chat. Don't put questions in the chat, please take them in the Q&A. So we are very thrilled to see how many people we attracted. We are still in this format of online webinars after so much year and a half more of pandemics. I know we are worn out, but we are very positively impressed by the attitude and the interest on the safety and human factors webinars. So I hope you will enjoy all the week. Tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, there will be webinars in Spanish exclusively, but today and then from Thursday and Friday, we have them back into English. So I wish everyone a good meeting, and I would like to invite Angel Luis Arias to open formally the event. Angel Luis, please.
Thank you, Tony. And from Madrid, good morning to everybody, and welcome to this EUROCONTROL-ENAIRE Human Factors Days. Muy buenos días a todos y bienvenidos a estas jornadas de EUROCONTROL-ENAIRE sobre factores humanos. It's a pleasure for me to open this event hosted by ENAIRE in partnership with Eurocontrol. And I would like to especially thank Tony Liku and the whole Eurocontrol team for making this event possible, together with ENAIRE's team, as well as the FAA, Eurocontrol, and APROCTA. The ENAIRE's Days aim to inspire and raise awareness about human factors and human performance. This is not just a statement, but a compromise established by ENAIRE, incorporating human factors and safety within the strategic business plan of our company. Aviation is one of the safest forms of transport, because every day thousands of people strive and put all of their effort and dedication into ensuring that everything works properly. Air navigation services play a vital role to society's progress, and this is why ENAIRE constantly endeavors to uphold and further improve its already excellent safety levels. For us, delivering a high level of safety in the Spanish space takes absolutely priority, and over anything else. Our effective operational safety management, reflected in our safety figures, enable us to state that in ENAIRE, we endeavor constantly to ensure that the Spanish space users have all the guarantees regarding the safety of their flight. Understanding and managing human performance is essential, because no matter how advanced the concepts and systems are, professionals will continue to play a crucial role in maintaining an air navigation system in which air safety is the highest priority. The people who do the work are the specialists in their work and are critical for system improvement. We need to understand people as part of the system and understand the system with the people. Trying to understand why and how things happen as they do requires an inside perspective. People create safety, and effective human performance is required to deliver an excellent ATM service. To keep the system safe, efficient and effective, adaptability and flexibility are necessary. It's the people in the system that provide this resilience, not only when things go wrong, but also when things go right. And most of the time, things do go right. To end my intervention, I would like to say that you, the professional, are the protagonists of this event. And I wish you to enjoy and make the most of these ENAIRE Human Factors Days towards a greater excellence in aviation safety. Welcome again, and thank you very much for your participation. Bienvenidos de nuevo y muchas gracias por vuestra participación. Thank you.
Anyways, many thanks for this opening, and thank you very much for being the champion of safety and human factors that you are. We really appreciate it, and thank you for allowing our teams to work together on this. Actually, my last big conference with participation in presence was in your home, at your home in Madrid, and thank you very much for that. We look forward to come back in this format, but until then, I think we can continue to share the best practices and the information in this safer environment on the webinar. So thank you very much. I know you are super busy, but thank you for taking the time to opening the sessions today. So the next quick summary of what will happen this morning. So I will give a quick introduction to what has been done in the last year and a half on the human factor activities in Eurocontrol and system thinking. And then my colleague and guru of system thinking and human factors, Stephen Sherrock, will give a speech on navigating the new reality, understanding and improving human work. Then we'll have a break, virtual coffee break to break the time in front of the screens, and then we'll come back with an overview by ENAIRE about human factors and practical perspective. Santi Cortez, the head of safety, quality and environment in ENAIRE, will give the speech, and will be followed by Jason Tomaszewski, the guru of human factors in FAA, about an overview of FAA about human factors and practical perspective. And we'll finish the day with a moderated panel where the speakers will be joined by Carlos Cavero, the president of APROCTA, and by Guadalupe Cortez, who is the head of human factors in ENAIRE. So without further ado, and then we'll have plenty of time, ample time, so please keep your questions and start shooting them as you see the presentation in the Q&A, and we will pick them up in the panel towards the end of our webinar session. So without further ado, then I think we should go ahead and start with the presentations. And the first one, as I said, will be a quick run through what is new in the human factors activities in Eurocontrol, based on once we were hit by the pandemics, what happens still in the human factors and system thinking activities. So the Fly My Flat plan for the next 15-20 minutes is to look at what updates we did in the classical human factors activities like critical incident stress management, the team resource management, and then a bit of the flavor of system thinking and ICAO human performance manual. An edited edition has been published by ICAO, and it's available for general public without any fee. And in fact, it's titled an ICAO human performance manual for the regulators, but I think everyone in this industry should read that. And we had a lot of influence into that. And again, big thanks to Stephen Sherrock and Fabrice de Grul and Ashley Robinson from Eurocontrol, who have contributed to that. And then a bit of the white papers on system thinking. This year, we further team up with Professor David Woods and Eric Holnagel. So we published two white papers in the domain of resilience engineering. And then I'll just mention this tool that it's an investigation tool, but with the help of ENAIRE team of human factors, it today can be used to support stress and fatigue event collections in a confidential way and segregated from any other occurrence data. And then you will hear more in the week from Daniel Avram in my team and Mercedes human factor teams of APROCTA on how that works and how it can be used. And then a brief advertise of what webinars we did, where you can find this information, and what other human factor webinars are coming in the dawn of this year. And of course, we will finish. I will finish with an advertised break. We are organizing together with CANZO big resiliency summit. I think with the pandemics, everyone these days is talking about resilience, resiliency, politicians, experts, managers, but we want maybe to demystify what resilient means, and we look forward to have many of you again. It will be a combined, a mixed event that hopefully will be with presence in Brussels, but also transmitted on the internet. So the season dates very quickly. The season deliverables were built in the early 2000s, so it was about the time, so they are updated. Hence, we took a small group of the safety human performance subgroup, and two of those documents, actually the quick guide, which is basically the introduction of the critical incident stress management guide, and the big guidelines are now updated, available on Skybrary. And if you want advice on practical implementations, roles in responsibility, how to recruit or select or elect your CIS peers, the appropriate training activities, again, promotion, information modules, and so forth, have been updated and included in these documents. So, two videos, one for the implementation of the CIS program and another one regarding CISM intervention. The first one is setting up the program, appointing the program manager, the setting it inside of an organization. But I would like to take 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes to try to play the second video. As such, I will swap to the Skybrary page, where you will see the CISM page. And in there, in addition to the documentation that I mentioned, there are the two videos done in the style of Sky clips, for those who are familiar with them. So
it's a busy day in the air traffic control room. All is going well until a critical incident occurs. The controller in charge is surprised and freezes. His colleague notices and takes over the traffic situation. The supervisor recognizes what has happened and releases the controller involved from his position. Remembering her CISM training, she stays calm and takes him to a quiet room, bringing him a glass of water as well. Then she calls one of the CISM peers. She finds a peer that is available to handle the situation. He says he can be at the unit shortly. When he arrives, the supervisor explains what happened and leads him to the affected controller. Next, the CISM peer starts going through the steps of this safer model. He introduces himself and makes sure the controller's basic needs are met. Stabilize. He listens to the controller's story without passing judgment. Acknowledge. He helps the controller face his emotions and puts them into perspective. Facilitate. He gives the controller advice on how to cope with stress reactions like this. Encourage. He helps the controller to organize next steps and achieve sufficient recovery. Recovery. If more support is necessary, the CISM peer can also help him find professional support. Referral. At the end of the intervention, the controller feels much better. The CISM peer says his goodbyes and fills out the evaluation form. This concludes the CISM intervention. Learn more about CISM interventions on Skybrary.
Right, moving on to the team resource management deliverables. Again, TRM material also was quite outdated. First guidance material on TRM was back in 1996. So it was about the time, and we took the opportunity of the pandemic. So the work of updating deliverables on team resource management has started just before pandemics. Earlier this year, at the first meeting of the safety team in spring, we approved the TRM guidelines and two annexes. The first annex is the mapping the TRM against the competency for air traffic controllers and ATSEP, the engineers, competency model. And the second one, it's about facilitator competence. And there you see the small team that worked in doing these documents. It's a picture shoot in Luxembourg just before the pandemic. So you see there Tony Seikel, Setsa Bunjevac, and the other teams. Actually, it was a great contribution from ENAIRE as well. Moving on system thinking and ICAO human performance manual. A quick recap, what we in the industry think it's system thinking. An approach that views systems in a holistic and integrated manner. And how important is to think that human performance in the context. And then, you know, there are different systems, and our system today in air traffic management aviation is complex. We can look at classical way are simple and complicated systems, but today we need new techniques and new approaches to look at complex systems. And an effort of 2 years by a mixed team, again with some meetings in Montreal, but finalized in a remote way. The ICAO has published this Doc 10-151 Manual on Human Factors for Regulators. Again, the title is probably unfortunate because the content we highly recommend is not just for the regulators. Okay, the regulators, I agree, they were missing a dedicated manual on human performance, but again, it's written in the style of the white papers of past Eurocontrols. If you remember, the white papers built a few years ago from Safety 1 and Safety 2, and the second white paper with the 10 system principles. Actually, 5 of these human performance principle style, they were addressed in this document of ICAO. Quickly, the structure, you know, there are 2 big parts. The part 1, the basics, terminology, definition of system thinking, a dissertation on human-centered design, and the 5 principles, which compile this part 1 on understanding human performance. And the part 2, to make it for the regulator, is how are these human performance implications for regulatory activities. When they oversight operators, when they are developing guidance materials, when they promote safety, and so forth. I've retained the 5 principles quite quickly. So the 5 ones, and we go quickly through them. You can read them with me on the slide. The first one, people's performance is shaped by their capabilities and limitation, not just physical capability, but the cognitive ones based on the training, the learnings that we have. The second one, people interpret situations differently and perform in ways that make sense to them. They think in patterns, and we like to, you know, identify things based on patterns in space, in time. And of course, looking at the local context, we may interpret situations differently. The principle number 3, people adapt to meet the demands of a complex and dynamic work environment. What also Anke Luis mentioned, people create safety, where resilience, and when we need to make the trade-offs, that falls to the principle 4, we assess the risk and make trade-offs. We cannot be thorough and efficient in the same time. But we adapt, and you know, our people, and we showed during the pandemics that we can be resilient. We can scale down and scale back up in quite a short period of time. The last one, people's performance is influenced by working with other people, with technology and environment. And I would only encourage you to read these 5 principles and how we encourage also the regulatory people to look at this in the context of their survey and supervisions. Linked to this, I think that these 2 white papers that I mentioned, the first one on the left, patterns in how people think and work, importance of patterns discovery for understanding complex adaptive systems, was a joint effort of this weak signals program that we run for some years with the academics and 2 air navigation service providers, DFS and Naviair. And we got inspiration there from Professor David Woods at Ohio State University, him and Eric Oldnagel, that put the basis of resilience engineering some years ago. And in fact, Eric is contributing to the second white paper on systemic potentials management, the way how we can try to measure the resilience of an organization. So good ideas there. Available on Skybrary. I put a short link to the first white paper. The second one, just go on Skybrary and Google it. So still now back to from system thinking to other more classical human factors, human performance issues, fatigue management. We have a toolbox there. With the most recent one, we have this roster evaluation, which is quite interesting. Web surveys, fatigue and sleep assessments, focus groups, and so forth. The tool that I mentioned that initially was designed to run in occurrence investigation, the full process of notification, data collection, up to recommendations to improvement, has been modified to be able in separate flow and confidentially kept separate on investigation to collect stress and fatigue events with separated forms. I've done there a couple of forms extracted from the taxonomy that was created with the help of Guadalupe and her team. And you will hear more on that. We hope we can show a hands-on event. Not I hope, for sure, we'll show a hands-on event, less slide, but with the tool, how that can be done and how you can best use it. And hopefully you can launch it soon inside ENAIRE. Webinars, I know in this period there is a lot of sitting in front of the screens, but with the safety human performance subgroup and the safety operations group of the safety team, in the first part of the year, we have run a couple of interesting webinars. The first one was to support the white paper that I mentioned earlier on patterns in how people think and work. You see there the link, and again, I should have mentioned in the opening of the ENAIRE Human Factors Days, we will be recording all these events, and the slides will be made available after. Just give us a bit of time, and we will write back to the participants where you can find the slides and the recordings. So the recordings available. The second one was the second webinar was in support of coming back to normal operations. And with Marcus Fleming, which is a sports psychologist, we did a very interesting morning on mental flexibility for the ADCOs, balance between phases where demands are high and where demands are low, with very much inspiration from how the professional sports and champions are looking at periods of low demand and then high demand, how you prepare for the Olympics, how you try to come back, and things from failures or from winning and so forth. Very interesting. The recordings are only on request. So if you are interested on that, write to us and we'll make them available, the link. And we finished just before the summer season with lessons learned on automation from flying community. The two captains, which were with us in Madrid in 2019 at the Human Factors Conference, Antonio Chialastri and Sebastian Alguaire, they give a further view on this automation, especially in the light of recertification and approval of 737 MAX to fly back into our airspaces. And we have prepared an interesting succession for the winter, September to December. We had just one on the clean dozen of human factors, to contrast of the dirty dozen of Gordon Dupont. Very well appreciated. Unfortunately, we have not recorded it. All the others will be. We'll start with the next one on the critical incident stress management in the 5th of October, and then you see the other ones. The true happiness with where lies, and the other where part 2 are with Professor Mark Hasen-Sachel. He is a professor of ubiquitous design at University of Siegen in Germany. But what in these two speeches, what he will do, it's about the human interactions with the machines, but with the machines of our generations, with chatbox, and what things that he's calling him otherware. So very informative, very interesting on how you design these chat boxes and so forth. And we finish with human system integration from virtual to tangible with Professor Guy Andreboy. Guy Andreboy is just returned to France after spending a career with NASA. He has designed some of the launch system for the space shuttles and be involved in the more recent developments that they have. And in there, we can see how they look for human system integration in these complex systems. And we finish with effects on automation in air traffic control. So that takes me to the last advertised slide before I pass to my colleague Stephen Shorrock about the Global Resiliency Summit. I think, as I mentioned in the beginning, everyone talks about resiliency these days. And with the sponsorship of our Director Generals in Council and Eurocontrol, we are putting together an interesting agenda to examine the resilience of our individuals, our personals, how the organizational and technology can support resilience, and then examine how COVID-19 taught us about resilience. And that's it from my side. It's a quick walkthrough to what we have done in these last periods of confinement, but the work has not stopped. I think the experts, they came together, they had the brilliant ideas about classical safety, human factors and human performance, but also system thinking. So now I think it's the time to pass the floor to Stephen. He requires no introduction. Unfortunately, we don't have too many Stephens. It's only one, and we need to clone him because he's in a big demand. And he has put together a new presentation. And this is what is impressing me with Stephen all the time. He's never repeating himself. And I look forward as well to hear it on navigating the new reality, understanding and improving human work. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Tony, for your very gracious, generous introduction, as always. So thanks everybody for attending. It's great to see so many people, but most of you from Spain, of course, and it's always great to work with ENAIRE and all of the people in ENAIRE. It always has been. So I'm going to spend the next, I don't know, 45 minutes or so till you get sick of me talking about human work. And I want to do so in a way that is as accessible as possible, that makes sense to everybody, and more to the point, that is practically useful. I want to start with asking you a question, and maybe you can put some comments in the chat in response to this. So just what do the following job roles have in common in your mind? So just have a think about that, have a look at those, get a flavor of them, and just put in the chat whatever you think some of these roles, or in fact all of these roles, excluding none, have in common. And for the rest of the presentation, you might get, or at least the first third of the presentation, you're going to get a few clues, I think. So my hopes for the session is to provide some accessible and applicable ideas about work, to help inspire curiosity and learning about work, and to help you improve your own work. And please feel free in the chat to just add your own insights, add your own examples, practical examples, add your own experiences, add your own reflections, and just and we can try to engage. Questions there'll be a panel session a little bit later. If you have specific questions, I'll try to address those as well, and I'll be asking you a few questions as well. So let's start this talk on the realities of human work, and it's going to be in three parts. So this first part is about the realities of all human work, and that's why I asked you that question a little earlier on. What do an anaesthetist, a surgeon, a diver, a well driller, air traffic controller, a pilot, an ATSEP, software developer, HR director, CEO, what do they have in common? The first point that I want to make is about, you've probably heard these phrases, and I think it's quite a useful way to frame some of these conversations, is that real work is rarely as we imagine it to be. And there's two kinds of work that I'm going to introduce here. You've heard of them, I guess. And one is work as done. That's actual activity. It's the real thing. It's what we really do. It's what we experience doing as people, no matter what role that you're in. And then there's work as imagined, which is what we think that people do. Often it's used to mean what we think people do who have different jobs to ourselves, or who are simply other people, but typically with different roles. It also applies, though, to our own work in the future. We all have an imagination about that. And the point is that imagination of others' work is always inaccurate and incomplete. And in fact, the imagination of our own work is as well, because we don't observe ourselves, for instance. And if we think of our work in the future, we have an imagination about it, but we don't know how it's going to go. And if you're as experienced in this as me, you start the day with a list of 10 or 20 things to do, and you maybe get through 3 or 4 or 5 of them. But work as imagined becomes part of the work environment. What does that mean? It means work as imagined does not just stay in the head, especially when we're involved in the management or design of others' work, or for instance, the training of others' work. Then it becomes part of the world. It becomes part of procedures. It becomes part of a training plan. It becomes part of automation. But closing this gap requires a constant dialogue between different interfaces. What do I mean by that? I mean between different kinds of roles, such as ATSEP, air traffic controller, HR manager, ops manager, and so on, and also between different locations, different towers, different units, corporate centers, technical centers, operational centers, and so on. And that's where we need to focus a lot more attention, is on those interfaces. But typically we don't. We like to focus much more attention on our own little group. Here's an example, and this is an example that happened. It's been published, and so I can say this. It happened many years ago in the UK. I say many years ago. It was probably about something like 6 or 7 years ago, something like that. It feels many years ago now. But what happened was there was a period of low atmospheric pressure in the winter and a series of level busts, and it was thought that these level busts were something to do with the low atmospheric pressure, and so a short study was done and a risk assessment was undertaken. And on the basis of this, some new standard phraseology was introduced into RT, which was standard pressure setting. So big jet 123, climb flight level 80, standard pressure setting or standard pressure, can't remember, one of the two. And this was thought to be a good idea to remind pilots coming into the London or leaving the London airspace. Anyway, what seemed like a good idea, what was imagined to be a good idea, didn't turn out to be as good idea as was thought, because pilots didn't really understand this, and they didn't understand that this was now standard phraseology, and therefore had to be, of course, read back. So what would happen is the controller would give the instruction, the pilot would read back the instruction as previously, but without these words standard pressure setting. Then a discussion would ensue, reminding the pilot that they had to read back all elements of the instruction. What was meant to be a 3-month trial lasted 4 days. I was there at the time of that. And it just goes to show that we don't necessarily have a good imagination of what others will do, how they respond, what their work pattern is, especially when they cross an interface, in this case, ground to air. The second one that was mentioned earlier by Tony, and in fact, these first 5 points here mirror closely those, is that people make trade-offs, compromises, and adjustments to get the work done. These 3 things really characterize work as done. If you think of if you drove into work today or drop your kids off at school, like I did, all you did, in fact, all of the time was make adjustments to your steering, speed, braking, and so on. You didn't do anything else other than that. You also probably made some trade-offs, and you probably made some compromises as well. And that characterizes all work, whether you are an air traffic controller, whether you are a pilot, whether you're a CEO, or anything, in fact, in between. And they're necessary for systems to work. And whilst they occur at all levels, and partly because of that, these trade-offs and compromises and adjustments can combine and interact, sometimes in unexpected ways. What do I mean by that? I mean that trade-offs sometimes, for instance, at the top of our organization, might be with regards to staffing, for instance, mean that people at other parts of the organization have to make trade-offs in order to cope with demand. Similarly, trade-offs by frontline staff may not be known by those who make decisions about the work, who are also making trade-offs. So trade-offs require communication, therefore, and that's really critical. If we're making compromises, if we're making workarounds, and I'm not saying violating rules, we're just making trade-offs and adjustments that others may not know about, then we need to communicate them. But another point here is that they require expertise. And in fact, I would go as far as to say that the ability to, or expertise in making trade-offs and compromises and adjustments, that really is genuine expertise. And you need a lot of expertise in order to know how to make them safely. Here's another example that kind of illustrates that, I suppose. This was, what happened in this example was that there's a loss of flight data. So a loss of FDP occasionally happens, of course. What the controllers realized on that horrible finding that they'd lost flight data was that they still had mode S data, and therefore they could reconstruct their mental pictures. And so they did that. Then there was no need to clear the skies for the period of the outage. This happened twice in a day. And then afterwards, the controllers, of course, reflected on how well they'd done to keep things going. One of them, though, said that actually what the procedure said was that they should have cleared the sky. The reason for that, which everyone was not maybe fully aware of at the time, was that not all aircraft in the airspace were Mode S equipped. Therefore, you were operating partly blind. But again, this was a trade-off, it was a compromise, and what we don't know is what would have happened if the skies were cleared. But also, this is not the easiest thing to do, and there could have been unwanted events in there. As it happened, nothing wrong happened, and everybody thought it was the right thing to do at the time. So it's just an example of the sometimes messy reality that we work in. The third one that I'd like to say is that people do things that make sense to them, given the context at the time that they're in. And this is what Tony mentioned earlier. It makes sense when you think about it. If you try to think of a time when you've done something that made no sense to you whatsoever, well, maybe you'd had one too many Portos or gin and tonics or something like that. But if that's not the case, then you probably won't be able to think of any time when you've done something that made no sense to you. It did make sense to you, and that's why you did it. So our intentions and decision-making are rational, given our local situation. And we call this local rationality, meaning our rationality is very local. But with hindsight, i.e. the ability to look back with information about what happened along the way and knowledge of outcomes, with these two things, others' decisions can seem irrational. The outcome bias in particular is very strong here. What that means is, if I give you two scenarios, two video scenarios, let's say, both exactly the same performance, it could be a driver, it could be an air traffic controller, it could be anything. Two videos, but one has a bad outcome and one has a good outcome. Everything else is the same. Then you will judge the performance. If you just saw the bad outcome video, you will judge the performance as being poor. If you saw the good outcome video, you would judge the performance as being good. The only difference is the outcome. We're all subject to this. And what it means is that knowing about a bad outcome prejudices our perspective on the very same work performance. So we need to try to understand why a decision or plan made sense to the person at the time. And that's what we try to do with local rationality. We try to jump into their shoes and take their perspective going forward through whatever happened in their experience, not in our experience of looking back. So you might want to ask questions then about what their goals were, what they were trying to achieve, what their expectations were, which will be based on their experience of history, what their capabilities, both mental, physical, were, where their focus of attention was, what were they looking at? Because at the time, we can only focus at one thing at a time. Right now, I'm focusing on, well, my screen, in actual fact, because I can't see all of you. What that means is I'm not focusing on other parts of the room because I can't. Now, if you were to video me right now, you'd be able to focus on all parts of the room, and maybe there's a gorilla running past me that I can't see. I wouldn't know. I'm not focusing. Also, the information that we have available and the options that we have available, all of these will be the things that influence our, let's say, rationality. Here's an example where a controller was not radar licensed, but did have a radar display in the tower for information purposes only. You may have heard this phrase, some of you, if you work in this way, maybe you don't. I've seen it in other units. But there was an emergency that occurred, and the controller made use of that radar data in their decision-making in order to provide control instructions to the pilot. Now, what did the report say? The report said that the controller should not have done that because they were not licensed. Now, that's interesting enough, because what we don't know is what would have happened if the controller had not have done that. What's more interesting is that another incident happened some months later, where a controller, having heard about this event, faced a very similar scenario and did not use the radar in order to give control instructions. And now you can guess what the report said, that the controller, in fact, should have done so, meaning you can't win in that situation. What we should be focusing on was, what was the controller's intention? How were they trying to best use their expertise in order to achieve a safe outcome? So the fourth now is that people have unique strengths, but they also have limitations. Now, human factors sometimes gets get stuck on the last part of this. We can get stuck on the limitations on all of the human error. But in fact, that can serve us in the wrong way, because mostly people have strengths, and without people, the work will not get done either safely or in any other way. It just won't get done at all, because we have abilities that no other part of the system has. You can think of some examples. Maybe you can put some in chat. So what are some of the abilities that people have that machines, no matter whether it's a general kind of mechanical machine or artificial intelligence, has? Moving away just from human beings in general, every individual also has unique contributions to bring to work. We all have gifts, skills, and passions. So we have gifts that maybe our mother would say, we were always good at that. For instance, I grew up, I was always an artist. That was what I wanted to be before I decided to be a psychologist. So we all have gifts. We all have skills, things that we've learned how to do. May not be gifted at it. Not everyone was born a gifted air traffic controller or engineer, but you've trained and you've become skilled in it. And we all have passions, meaning something that we're very passionate about, and we're passionate enough about it to try to do it, even if we're not that skilled at it. But we're very passionate about it, and we will keep driving. You can be skilled at something without being passionate about it. So we all have these things. We also have limitations, of course, and you can think of some of those. For a start, we all have a memory which is limited by nature. We all have attention which is limited. Our ability to make decisions is limited, and so on. And I put at the bottom there that even Olympic athletes perform below their average half the time. So even the best people at their job, they perform on any measure below their average for half of the time. Here's an example of a limitation. So in this case, in this particular center, and I took this photograph, what happened was there was a series of incidents where controllers seemed to be overloaded. After a series of interviews, I couldn't find any evidence really of being overloaded. But what I did find in the restroom was this, which, as you can see, is some high energy drinks. And it made me ask different questions about sleep. What I found out was that the controllers could work a 16-hour shift and have 8 hours off, and then work another 16 hours and have 8 hours off, and then work another 16 hours before the end of their cycle. Obviously, in hindsight, but obviously in foresight for some of us, that's not actually a good or safe shift pattern at all. It suited the organization, maybe from a staffing flexibility point of view. It also suited the controllers who didn't want to live close sometimes, some of them, to the center. From a safety point of view, it wasn't a good idea at all. The final point on this section is that work is influenced by multiple interacting contexts. So all outcomes are influenced by the multiple contexts of work that you can see around this circle on the screen there. So we have the societal context looking at COVID, for instance, right now, the social and cultural, the personal affecting all of us, the political affecting all of us at quite a high level. But then we have others, such as the procedural, the temporal, or about the tempo of work, the time. Some of these are available to the senses. We can see them, feel them, touch them. Others are not, such as production pressure. We feel it. We can't see it, we can't touch it, but we feel it, and it's a driver of performance, and a very strong one. Now, when something goes wrong, much of the context is not available for replay, meaning you may have a replay of the voice recordings. You may have both internally or over the RT. You may even have video replay, but you don't have the replay of the production pressure or some of the other factors that the person was feeling at the time. This example was one in conversation with an engineer who said that at night time they were working on a 3,000 volt circuit, but they did so sometimes quite routinely without protection or without isolation. Instead, they would use rubber gloves and boots that were certified to 1,000 volts. Obviously, right, quite risky. But no engineer, no lighting engineer, no engineer of any sort wants to be electrocuted. So why would you actually do that? because there were multiple factors influencing their performance, and one of them was time pressure. They need to do this work during the night time with a very limited time available. From an external perspective, from a quality and safety perspective, it's unbelievable that this could happen. From the engineer's perspective, it's quite clear why something like this should happen, because there were various factors influencing their performance and influencing that decision, which made sense to them again at the time. So we have all of these kinds of points, contextual factors influencing all of our performance. So that brings me to the end of the first third, and I hope that's useful. I'm not going to read these out, I've just read them all out, but these are just 5 of the things that I'd like to emphasize for establishing a baseline of understanding on the reality of all human work, whether you're operational staff, whether you're in senior management, whether you're a regulator or a member of the judiciary. In fact, these 5 factors here apply to all of us. So just maybe something for the chat to have a think about while I carry on talking is what are some of the main dilemmas or challenges involved in your work? Dilemma is where you have 2 or more options, neither of which is really clearly ideal, neither of which is clearly favorable or clearly better. Another way to put this, if you want to answer this in chat, is what makes the day harder than it needs to be as far as you're concerned at work? What makes your job more difficult than it should be? While you think about that, I'll move on to now understanding the reality of work. This is part 2. The first thing is I'd like you to ask is really to be curious about others' work. This is what really drives all improvement of work, and whether we're talking about safety or equality or well-being or anything else, is this basic curiosity in others' work. So as was said earlier at the start of this conference, people are the experts in their own work. So we call this field expertise. You'll see this described in the systems thinking white paper. But we often have those to learn, most to learn from those that we interact with the least. We like to stay within our very close circles. And if this was a conference and you imagine yourself walking into the room now, who are you going to sit next to? Probably it's going to be someone that you work very closely with. But who do you have the most to learn from? Probably not that person. You spend so much time with them. You know their work, they know yours. You make lots of assumptions about each other's work. Third point is to find out what's working well. And the question asked earlier, what makes work more difficult than it needs to be? 2 basic questions asked in that order, ideally, will be helping you to find out about others' work, asking open questions such as you can see on the right. Second, when we're talking about improving work, is to keep in mind what kind of work you're talking about or thinking about, rather. So work is done, I introduced earlier, this is real work. It's the real thing. It's the stuff that you do, and it's the only real thing. But you can never fully understand it. Nobody can ever fully understand it. Once it's been and gone, it's gone. It's not available anymore. There's no video recording. There's no voice recording. There's nothing that can bring that work back to life. But there are proxies for human work that you can see. So there's work as imagined, I've introduced already. There's work as prescribed in the rules and procedures. There's work as disclosed. This is what we say that we do. It's not necessarily what we do for all sorts of reasons, but it's what we say that we do. This work is analyzed. If you go into the safety department, this is what a lot of the work there is, analysis, breaking work down into parts based on disclosure, the yellow, based also on imagination, sometimes based on the next one, which is work as observed. This is what we see, but we can't see everything. We can see what people do with their bodies. We can see what happens in terms of the effects of their actions, but we can't see what goes on inside their heads. We can't see how they feel. And then there's work as simulated, which gets close to the real thing, but in a simulation, as you'll be well aware, some critical things are missing. For instance, you know that really nothing bad is going to happen. And some aspects of the local culture really are missing as well. Maybe some aspects of supervision are missing, some of the really important things. And then there's work as instructed, so how how we are trained to do work, which is partly based on the orange circle, work as prescribed, but partly based on some other things. You'll be aware as soon as you leave the college, basic training, you get into the unit, then you're taught how things really work. And then there's work as measured, the various measures of work, which measure a small fragment of work in actual fact. And then there is something quite different, which is work as judged, where we make judgments of others' work and of our own, based partly on imagination, based partly on what people say, work as disclosed, and so on. The next point I want to make about understanding is to assume goodwill and make it easy for people to say what's on their mind. And you've heard this before. Tony, I think, was the inventor of this kind of this phrase that nobody goes to work to have an accident. And I'd go further to say, well, we very rarely have accidents, even incidents, but no one goes to work to have a bad day of any sort. So we need to assume that people go to work with good intentions. If they don't, then we're talking about something quite different. And that's quite rare. But second, fear of consequences drives almost all non-disclosure. So we have on the right there, work is disclosed and work is done. And you can see that there's an overlap. And what we want is for that overlap to be as large as possible. It will never be complete because we cannot even remember everything that we've done on a particular day. And I'm sure if you've been interviewed as a traffic controller, for instance, or as an engineer, if the interview was a few days or weeks after the event, there will be things you just cannot remember. But there's another aspect of non-disclosure, which is about fear, which is where we fear something happening to us. And that's when we leave out some of the details. So we need to create relationships and an environment where people feel safe to be open and honest. Again, that goes back to assuming goodwill. Fourth on understanding is to get multiple perspectives. And this is a really basic fundamental idea in what we call systems thinking. So different people have different insights into work. They have different experiences of work. They have different perspectives on the very same situation. And therefore they see problems from a different angle. And they see different influences on these. Now, when I'm doing work interviewing people, and I've just completed 20 interviews with engineers, I'm spending a lot of time with engineers nowadays, so working with them. The first question I ask them is, what is the problem that we're talking about in your view? We spend so much time often talking about the solution that we forget that people have very different perspectives on what the problem is. And that's something that we need to explore in much more detail. So what is the situation? What is the problem? What is the opportunity if you're talking about an opportunity? And then people see different solutions depending on how they see the problem and depending also on their perspectives and their goals. So we have here various workers disclosed. This means that we can ask different people to give different perspectives from their own points of view, and we have workers observed. One of the really useful things that you can do is, let's say that you're a supervisor in a tower. Let's say you're in Madrid. Now, let's say in Barcelona, they have some kind of problem or some situation that they can't really think how to resolve. Now, taking that supervisor from Madrid and putting them to observe in Barcelona will give you quite different insights to if the supervisor from Barcelona just steps back and tries to observe. Now, having them both there will give you different insights to if you just have that one insider. The final point on this part 2 is that we need to consider the multiple influences on performance. So this is something that I've mentioned already, that these exist, of course, these multiple influences. And so we have to spend some time mapping them, if you like. So all performance has multiple influences, and these can be internal or external, how we feel versus things that happen in the world. They can be local, to our very local situation in the ops room, or they can be distant, something that happens in the regulator's office. They can be acute, happening here and now, and then gone, or they can be latent, lying there in the environment. They can be visible, or they can be invisible. Maybe you can touch them, or maybe you can't. But you cannot change the human condition, as James Reason once said, but you can change the conditions of the human, or the conditions of human work. So I represent this now like this. We have, maybe you could say, a pretty flower in the middle, and then we have the various contextual influences. Now, the important thing is that those influences, whether it's the temporal or the political or the technological or the regulatory, they don't only affect work as done, they also affect all of those proxies. So work as imagined is affected by the legal and regulatory, by the procedural context, and so is work as done. So we can see that we can, if you like, draw imaginary lines now from the grey boxes on the outside to the middle boxes, but also to the middle, to the internal box of work as done, to map some of those influences for a given situation. Here is it expressed in a different way. So we have work as imagined that affects work as measured, the various measurements on our performance. In a hospital, for instance, there are, at least in the United Kingdom, there are target times, the amount of time that must not be exceeded in order for a patient to be seen, for instance, in accident and emergency. At least this target used to exist. I'm not sure that it still does. These measures influence both work as done, the real thing, the real deal, and work as disclosed, what we say, because we don't want to disclose ourselves necessarily being outside of a particular target time, for instance, because we don't want to get into trouble. These are the grey contextual influences, the outside of the circle earlier, and you can see that these now influence all of these aspects of work. The proxies, such as work as imagined, may be influenced by a person's background. Maybe someone, a regulator was previously a controller, for instance, maybe 20 years ago. Maybe someone in healthcare regulation was previously a nurse 20 years ago. Also influenced by organizational requirements, by the procedures, how things should be done. And then there are influences on the work as measured as well, as you can see there on the screen. Various different influences on what can be measured, what is measured. And then there are influences on work as done. And then finally, there are influences on work as disclosed. Now, these are just for any given situation, some imaginary influences. Feasibly, almost all of these grey influences could influence all of the proxies, those different kinds of work, as well as the real thing, work as done. So that concludes part 2. I hope it's useful so far. I can't see any of you, so I'm also hoping that you're all still here, and I'm not just talking into the ether. But assuming that you are, we'll carry on to part 3, which either you'll be happy to know is the last part or not. We'll see. So part 3 is about. Before that, here's another question for your chat. So, what is it about your work that others would find surprising? So what is it about your work that others would find surprising, but that might be relevant to their work? Okay. In other words, if you had to write a postcard to somebody not in your immediate working environment, in different function, different department, different organization, what would you say about your work that might surprise them, but that would be relevant to them? So have a think about that. Put some thoughts in the chat if you would be willing to do that. Finally, predictably, we are now on improving the reality of work, because in fact, knowledge of human factors doesn't really mean anything unless you can in some way implement it to make some kind of improvement. It's no good knowing that we have imperfect memories and so on, unless you can do something to support that. What I want to start with is to encourage us to invest in diverse relationships. And as part of that, this is a kind of 2-for-1, buy one, get one free, focus more attention at the interfaces. So all change, the first part is, all change, no matter how technical, happens through relationships. Whenever you want to make a change, that change is going through the conduit or the channel of the relationship. When you want to implement a project or when you want to do something in the short or the long term. And all of you will have examples or memories or experiences of where things have gone really well. And I am of no doubt that when things have gone really well at work on a particular project or a particular day, the relationships have been good. And most opportunities can be found in the interfaces, and that could be between different job roles, between different groups, between different departments, and between different locations, etc. If you want to get something done, that's where you're going to find most opportunities for improvement, because we don't spend that much time trying to improve those. The third point is that change is likely to happen by collaborating with people different to yourself. I gave you earlier the example of if this was a physical conference, you would tend to be sitting with like-minded people in the same job roles, probably your fellow professional colleagues. What if you sat next to people that do a completely different job role? What if you went to break with those people and asked them questions to being curious again about their job? Now, what you might also find within your professions, maybe your air traffic controllers, engineers, ATSEPs, Meteo, HR, whatever your job role, safety, it doesn't matter. There will be people that you know that have what we would call a connecting capacity. It means that they are able to connect with lots of different people quite different to yourselves. They have, let's say it's a controller who has very good relationships with engineering. Or they have good relationships with various middle managers, good relationships with projects. You always find these people. I often find them in professional associations, in my observation, but not always. Not always. They're what we call connectors, and they're not leaders necessarily. They're just people who are very good at connecting other people. Not for their own benefits. They're not networkers. They're not in it for themselves. They're in it because they get joy out of connecting people. So look out for those people. They're just as important as leaders, if not sometimes more so. Second point is to start with what's strong when trying to improve. We often do the reverse. We kind of start with what's wrong, and we never even get to hear about what's strong, because you can spend all your day complaining about all the problems, of course, in any area of life. We often take for granted what's working well, and what a shame that is. So what I would encourage you to do is something that I do myself, is start improvement conversations by talking about what's strong and not what's wrong. Here's one practical reason why that's important, I think. Let's say there were cuts in the organization. There had to be cuts to something. There have to be cost-saving cuts. Now, the question is, what do you want to defend with your life? What do you not want to be cut under any circumstances, because you think it's really important for how you work? Okay, that's the stuff that's strong that you want to defend, but also maybe you want to extend. Again, maybe there's some good practice in Barcelona Tower. There's something that works really well that actually the controllers, the engineers, the people there wish they'd have done earlier. They're proud of it. It makes their lives easier. Now, do people in other towers know about it? Because that's what's strong, and maybe it can be translated and shared elsewhere, this good practice. If you don't ask the question, then it's going to be very hard to extend it, and when the time comes when you want to defend it. So start with what's strong. Just as a humorous aside, you can imagine this best-selling book on playing championship golf. There's a difference that you're playing championship golf in this book by learning the secrets of the worst 20 players in the world. Now, that sounds like a terrible book in some ways. I think it sounds like a great book. I would buy it because I think it would be quite funny. But in a way, it's sometimes it seems like how we do safety. We look at how everything goes wrong in the worst ways and try to learn from that. But how things went wrong in the worst ways are very few and do not necessarily represent the day-to-day life, certainly do not represent the day-to-day work. So we need to look at those, and that's important, but we need to start with what's working particularly well, what's working well for us. Third, and we've only got a couple of these left now, but this is the third tip for improvement, which is to choose the right mode of change. So sometimes change is done to people. Sometimes it's inevitable. Of course, governments do this, and all organizations have to do this sometimes. Change is sometimes done to people. It's not for their benefit. It's for the organization's survival, maybe, or for whatever reason, doesn't matter, but change is done to people, and we never like this. In fact, we experience it in a sense as violence, as something being done to us without our permission, without our consent, and not for our benefit. But then very often change is done for people. That means that change is done by somebody else for your benefit, for my benefit, at least as imagined. It may not work out that way. Now, change should be done in these last two modes of change most often, which is with people, which is the collaborative approach, and also by people. There's a difference here that when we do change with people, this is a collaborative mode of change between staff, let's say, and managers and so on. There's kind of more coordination. It cannot happen without each party. Change done by people is a bit different. It doesn't need permission. It could just be a bunch of controllers getting together. Now, a controller friend of mine called Anna Venneberg, she's not online. If she is, then she'll blush. Swedish controller, she opened my eyes to this years ago because I was very much in the for space. What can the organization always do for these controllers, engineers? I was always in that space of thinking, or what can they do with them more so? And she said, you know, when I was a controller, we used to get together after work and talk about dilemmas, like moral dilemmas almost, but just dilemmas at work that we had encountered or just imagined. And we just talked about them ourselves. We didn't need any managers to organize a room. We didn't need permission. We just did it ourselves. And that really opened my eyes to actually maybe what is quite a Scandinavian way of thinking. I don't know. But she was talking about change done by people. Fourth is to choose the right means and timing of change. This is where we get down to the nitty-gritty, in fact, of human factors, because the right intervention depends on the situation. So let's say you have various options. Now, I work sometimes in healthcare, and what you find in healthcare, which I just do voluntarily, what you find there is training is the solution to everything. But training is not the solution to the design of a bad interface, a bad screen, a bad touch panel. Training is not a good solution for that, because now you have to train everybody how to use this terrible device. In this case, of course, it's going to save a lot of money and have better outcomes to redesign the device itself, but that takes time. So there will always be trade-offs and compromises in the solution, but you should think about those carefully. And then be mindful for unintended consequences, because there will often be some, and what you will have found as professionals, I'm sure you will have found that a solution has been proposed, which looked good on paper, and you could think back to the standard pressure setting earlier, and then what's implemented is not actually the same. It's not exactly the same. There's been lots of trade-offs, adjustments, compromises along the way. So what's in practice now is not the solution that was originally imagined. So we have the system as imagined and the system as found or implemented, and they're two different systems, in fact. Now people have to work around this real system, and there are unintended consequences or secondary problems. So you might have solved the original problem, but now you've got one or more additional problems caused by the intervention or solution itself. Therefore, of course, you need to keep monitoring, mindful that these will happen. The other thing that will happen is when you implement a solution, people very often adapt it for their own use, for their own work as done, again, in ways that make sense to them. Finally, I'm sure you're relieved about that. The last one is that is to make it easy for things to go right, which is an easy thing to say and a hard thing to do, but it's by doing the things that I've already talked about, really. So it should be easy for things to go right, hard for things to go wrong, very hard for things to go very wrong. And you can increase that severity as you go along. It should be extremely hard for things to go extremely disastrously terrible. So this is just something I'd like you to commit to memory, actually. When something went wrong, or even in advance, preferably, ask yourself, was it easy for things to go right and hard for things to go wrong? Or was it easy for things to go wrong? That's what we don't want, of course. Now, In making things go right, you can see again those contextual factors around the outside. That is where you have leverage. That is where you have power to intervene. As I said earlier, you cannot change the human condition, but you can change the conditions of work. And the conditions of work are those small circles there around work as done. I put this in as a kind of bonus, and partly because I'm working in 5s, as you can see here, and this would make 6, which wouldn't, you know, it wouldn't look as good. So I'm sneaking it in here, but it's about a similar thing, making it easy for things to go right. All behavior is driven by 3 things, and especially when you want to change behavior, it's driven by 3 things, and that is capability of the person, again, physical, mental, psychological, their motivation. Do they want to do it? Motivation is always an internal, inside job. Although we try to make it, we try to pressure people very often. And is there an opportunity to do it? These 3 things will influence behavior, and especially behavior change. If you're missing one of those 3 things, then you're going to have trouble implementing a change in behavior that is sustainable over time. For example, let's say somebody is capable of doing something, they can do it, and they have the opportunity. They've got the time, the place, and so on, but they're not motivated. Well, I've got children like that, so I can tell you what happens. The behavior doesn't happen. Or let's say someone is motivated and they have the capability to do something, but they don't have the opportunity. And we find many examples of that in organizations. Of course, they've got gifts to give. They've got skills and passions that cannot be expressed because there's no opportunity for them to do so. So this is a summary on this final part on improving the reality of work. I'll not read them all out again. I've just spent lots of time doing that, but that's just a summary. Now, that's not to say that there are others, because there are lots of ways to improve work. You could state lots of different principles. I've tried to keep it, to put my own, let's say, theory into practice. I've tried to keep it in groups of 5. We have 5 fingers, at least most of us do. That's the normal number. And we can remember 5 things usually. And within each of those, I've just put 3 points to keep it reasonably clear. Final question that you might put in the chat. What have you and your colleagues done to improve work that you're proud of? To have a think about that. What have you and your colleagues done? How have you come together to improve work in ways that you're proud of? Hopefully you can think of some ways. And if you think of any, then put them in the chat. I'm going to finish now, not by more, but just by some advertisements. So this is a commercial break, if you like. I'm going to skip that because we've already talked about this. This is an article in the latest Hindsight magazine, and we're up to 32. The next one is 33 on digitalization. This one is on the new reality, and there are another 5 points here under this title of Navigating the New Reality that you can read yourself and reflect on, because this is very much about you. If you'd like to read and reflect on those, it's about you in this new reality that we find ourselves in. And hopefully you've heard of Hindsight. If not, then you have now. It's a magazine on human and organizational factors in operations, mostly in air traffic management, but not only. We have lots of articles from interviews with surgeons and chief fire officers and so on, all kinds of stuff in there. I encourage you to read it. I encourage you to write and to contribute to spread the word, and hopefully I've not gone over. I don't think I have. So I'll finish on this, just as a reminder that we all have gaps in our imagination, especially of others' work, but our imagination is actually where all of the solutions to our problems come from as well. And that's it. So that's it from me. I hope you're all still here. I think you are. I can see Tony. That's encouraging. And I'm going to hand back to Tony and thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Steve. Indeed, we were, and there were a lot of confirmations in the chat. There are a lot of reaction in the chat to your questions, and I suggest we take them that in the panel. Fantastic timing. We are sharp at 11:45 Central European Time. Fabulous presentation. I'm pretty sure we'll come back on interacting with you in the panel. So, having said that, a big thanks also to Angel Luis for opening. And it's time for a short virtual coffee break. So we take 20 minutes coffee break. Don't disconnect. We'll come back at in 20 minutes at 12:05. So see you in 20 minutes. Welcome back to the part 2 of the kickoff webinar of the ENAIRE Human Factors Days. The first one to take the floor in part 2 will be Santi Cortez, the head of Safety, Quality and Human Factors department in ENAIRE, a close friend of mine. He doesn't need any introduction, actually. Santi, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Can you hear me, Tony?
Yes, we can hear and see you. Can you just put the presentation in slide mode?
Perfect. Slide mode. Coming now. So thank you very much, Tony, for your kind words, and especially for supporting us throughout our human factor experience at ENAIRE, always helping us to progress the issue at company level. Thank you also. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for these days. I hope you get lots out of it. My presentation will not be too technical because I'm not an expert. It will be from a managerial point of view, what we've been finding, what findings we've had during our ENAIRE experiences as human factors unit. So when asked to present from what practicalities we found at ENAIRE, went back to when we started to consider this was an important activity or subject matter for the company. That was 2016-17. Angel Luis, our Director General, had just come in, and he always considered safety to be our priority, as he already mentioned before, and he considered human factors were critical to safety. So he decided there should be a specialized unit in the company through which the company would give importance to the subject matter and through which to promote the subject matter internally and externally. So in 2017, we created the unit, Guadalupe is the head of that unit. We also resourced it or tried to resource it, because the first practical lesson, to put it in a sense, is that there are not that many experts in human factors around. It's difficult to find them, and that's been one of the biggest problems we've had in accelerating human factors deployment within the organization. Fortunately, Guadalupe is not only the person, leading the team, but she's also training quite a few people. So we've now got a very competent team ready to face any challenge. After 2017, 2018, 19, we got the structure in place, the policies, the procedures, everything to be able to work. And so by 2020, we wanted to go live. And what happened in 2020? We had the pandemic, very unfortunately for all of us, and a very big crisis. So 2020 was a great testbed for human factors, but a very difficult year for everybody, as you well know. There was uncertainty regarding health, uncertainty regarding jobs. There was lots of changes that were more for the people than with and by the people, because they were imposed at a very, very quick speed by what we learned every day about the pandemic. So it was a year in which human factors played a very important role. And in that sense, after going through that year, the second lesson learned at social level, not necessarily at company level, not necessarily at the NSP level, is that humans are flexible and adaptable. We managed to go through a year of lots of change, lots of uncertainty, anxiety, and I think now that we are nearly seeing the end to this pandemic, or to the effects of the pandemic at least, humans have proved to be able to adapt very well. Now, bring it down to ENAIRE's level, to what's happened at ENAIRE. We started 2020 with our fatigue and stress risk management system being launched in January, with setup before the policy, the action group. We had the reporting means. Now we're working with EUROCONTROL to be able to report through eTOKAI. We had all the links to the safety department too, and as we were going to go live, we also had to communicate a lot to our staff because of course it was a new kit, so they needed to know it existed. So we spent a lot of time communicating, and while we were communicating, we also noticed that not everybody had too much confidence in this system, in this new system. Some people thought of this might just be, you know, some sort of makeup thing for the company, or maybe they're trying to work around to get us to report things which afterwards they'll use for God knows what. In that sense, that's lesson 3 for us. You can have a wonderful system, but unless you have the confidence of the people in that system, it will not work. Fortunately, throughout 2020, I think we've gained confidence from our staff in the system, So we've got a wonderful system and a system that people are confident in. So that's good news. Then came March, and in March we had to get all the safety protocols in place for health purposes. What did the pandemic imply, not only for ENAIRE, but I guess for all ANSPs? Two major things. We had to keep the service going. We had to facilitate all those airplanes that were flying for health purposes. We had to give them a good service. And we also had to, number two, very important priority, protect our controllers and staff's health in days in which we didn't know that much about the illness, and things evolved at great speed. We had to be very careful at protecting the health of our workers. And the combination of those two things was applied within ENAIRE through breaking up the staff in two teams, basically, at the control centers. We had one backup team and one operational team. The operational team was of course then working with fewer resources for the roster. So we had to plan for longer shifts. And the idea was to go changing the operational team by the backup team every certain amount of time, so there would always be a backup team to ensure service continuity. In order to ensure isolation of our controllers while delivering the service, as I said, they did longer shifts, and to get those shifts approved, those longer shifts, National Supervisory Authority asked us to keep a very close eye on fatigue issues, fatigue reports, and we did it. We would have done it anyway, but we had a demand from the NSA to do it. So there was very closely looked at fatigue, and what happened is no fatigue reports came in. So lesson number 4 is that more hours in a shift do not necessarily imply fatigue, as long as afterwards there's bigger breaks between those shifts, a longer period between the shifts. What we did find in any case was stress as the pandemic continued, especially when we got to the summer of 2020 with 50% of the flights of 2019 coming more or less. People had stress because of the pandemic, because of the social situation, because of all the uncertainties around. That's nothing different to other people of the population. But there was also stress because of new operational circumstances taking place. The mix of traffic was not at all like it had been in previous years. There were many more visual flights, fewer instrumental flights. Not everybody had retained the same skills. Ourselves, with the newly licensed controllers, those that had come in from September 19 onwards, had not always practiced with lots of live airplanes. They'd done it on simulators, so there were situations which provoked stress, and that would be lesson number 5. We were looking out for fatigue, and what we got was stress. So one doesn't always get what one thinks one might from the system. Anyway, continued. This list of risks and mitigation ideas is not particular to ENAIRE. It's work done through Eurocontrol coordination with all the other ANSPs at the European level at least, and also globally through the council work groups. I would like to point out to skill degradation, which for us as a risk was the major worry as we entered 2021, and vaccination was working well, and we thought we would recover substantial amounts of traffic for the summer 2021. We were worried that skill degradation would become a big issue, not only for traffic controllers, but for the rest of the personnel. So as other service providers in Europe, we considered all these issues here that we point out. and we prepared what at the European level is known as the Normal Operations Recovery Plan. In our case, the Normal Operations Recovery Plan, having pooled on our monitoring of the human factors during the pandemic, included basically 4 measures. First one, we did not want the traffic to come in sudden bursts. We wanted it to come gradually so that our controllers could recover their skills if degraded slowly and naturally, and not have too many variations in demand. So pre-tactically, we checked the demand for the oncoming weeks, and if we saw there was a great increase in demand, a big step in demand, we'd reduce capacity to keep the sectors to a manageable level of traffic. We also gave our controllers high load exercises on the simulators. High load not meaning the highest load around, but the load we thought would come in the summer, which was more or less around 70–80%, which is what finally came. We planned for that in January, February, and fortunately we got it right, and that's the traffic that we had. We also put extra controllers in the control centers and the ops rooms, just in case any circumstance, unplanned circumstance took place. We specifically trained those extra controllers in human factors and in TRM, so that they could facilitate the work of their colleagues. And finally, as I said before, as we had controllers coming in since September 2019, which were worried they had never in the ops room had the amount of traffic that others had before. What we did was have a specific on-the-job training session for them as traffic started to increase. And what happened basically is that we successfully recovered traffic, and now end of September can say that we are back more or less to the normality, 70–80% of 2019 normality, but there aren't big variations in traffic now. That's the last lesson I wanted to share with you. Thanks to having monitored human factors during the low traffic period and the pandemic, we've managed to recover successfully from the safety point of view. And so human factors as originally thought has been critical to keeping safety in the company. And those are the practicalities I wanted to share with you. So thank you very much, and I hope you find the sessions of interest.
Thank you very much, Santi. Thank you for your presentation. We'll come back to some of the points because, as you said, many of these mitigations implemented during COVID is not just applicable to ENAIRE, but to the other NSP. So I encourage the colleagues, participants to shoot the Q&A, the questions in the Q&A, and we'll take them from there in the panel. So I would like now to move to Jason. Jason Demagalski is another great friend. He decided to cross the pond many years ago, and now he's one of the leaders of human factors in the FAA, ex-NUTS, and he flew back to UK, so he didn't start at 4 o'clock this morning, so it's a more decent time on the UK time. Jason, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Can you hear me, Tony?
Loud and clear, and the slides are good. Thank you.
Sorry. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Jason Demagalski, Human Performance Manager at the FAA's Air Traffic Organization. Thank you for the invitation to be here. I appreciate being part of this fantastic week you've got. Guadalupe asked me to talk about what we are doing at the FAA in terms of our ANSP perspective. And so I want to kind of take you through some of our focus areas right now. We in the FAA are a large organization, and human factors and human performance is divided over the organization. So I will kind of explain a little bit of that as I go into this. That I'm going to give you largely my team's perspective in the safety and training organization, but I will cover some of the other work that's being done throughout the FAA. To give you an idea of perspective, and so one of the challenges we have in the ATO is the size of the operation, geographically dispersed and in sheer numbers of people. So anything we want to implement and change is a challenge because of the sheer size of getting to everybody. It's getting education out to people, supporting the operational facilities, So a lot of the great work that we would like to see done just takes much longer to implement and to start seeing the delivery of, because of that challenge of size. We control about 5.3 million square miles of airspace in the US, 24.1 million square miles of oceanic airspace. We have 21 en route facilities across the domestic US, 147 terminal radar facilities, about 520 towers, 14,000 controllers. That number is down right now, but we're working with trainees to get back up to that, around that number, and 7,200 ATSEPs, or as we call them here, technical operations, tech ops. So whether it comes to working with our controllers or our technicians, getting change, getting the education out there, and as they see delivery of the actual performance metrics takes some challenges. We, like many of you on this call, get this question all the time. It's common sense what you do. Well, there are aspects of what we do which are, but a lot of what we are applying is a scientific approach and bringing rigor to the processes. So taking away those gut hunches, that quarterbacking, those discussions of, I know what happened, I've been in a controller for 20 years. Underneath that, what is the data telling us? What does the science bring to it? And how do we bring those two together? And that's where I want to talk about human performance and human factors, because we're using those names interchangeably, even this morning. And so for us in the air traffic organization, we try to explain those two words in a different way. And that, I think, is an important challenge for how we move forward and what our roles are in helping the organization. I took this graphic from Kanzo, so I'm not going to claim any credit for the triangle. But what we tried to explain was, for the FAA, we are the glue between the business and the human factors science and expertise. And we certainly over the years have had some pushback on human factors across the organization. Often people see the science and don't understand what to do with it. They hear a lot of good academic thinking, but again, what do I do with that in my facility? And so we formed the human performance team to create that barrier and that bridge between the experts we have in human factors, and we have those experts in Oklahoma City at CAMI, in Atlantic City at the Tech Center, with Volpe, NASA, numerous universities. We have the human factors experts we can turn to and get that knowledge, that research, those perspectives that we need to inform the business as to what it could be doing. And then we have what the business needs are, which are traditionally focused on service delivery, safety, efficiency, the metrics a business would need. And so we place ourselves in the middle of that to actually take those business needs, hear what the business is saying the problems are, and then we can go to the science, the literature, our team, our peers, and ask for their knowledge, their expertise, and then provide back to the business those high-level, workable, implementable ideas. Or the other way around, we have our human factor scientists who conduct research, come up with ideas, and then we will take that and make sure, again, we pass it to the business in a way that gets that's usable and applicable. I think in the past, we've been guilty of a lot of what I call shelfware. So we've done a lot of great research and it hasn't gone anywhere in the business because nobody in the middle was helping to take that two-way journey from the science to what the business needs. And ever more as we go forward into the future, that is important because the money won't be there to conduct academic research. It needs to be applied, usable recommendations. So that really puts us on this pendulum between all the different drivers, and those drivers aren't just the ones I mentioned already, but there are political drivers, business drivers, cost, COVID drivers, and everything changes constantly. And so as a human performance team, we are trying to listen to all those different pressures that different leaders are under, different businesses, different parts of the business are seeing, and affect that and help that. And even given the size of the operation, we can have different cultures in different parts of the organization, different parts geographically. And so we have to try and work through all those different challenges to deliver a change in human performance. You won't hear me say much, by the way, about safety culture today. We are just about to start a lot of work on safety culture here in the air traffic organization. And we actually have a new team and a new specialist standing up, Dr. Rachel Seeley, who is going to focus more on safety culture. So I won't talk about that much today. I'll focus more on some of the other human performance areas that we're trying to address and work through. The team basically covers these three areas. Now, I have colleagues who work in the PMO, the project management office. So they do some of those traditional human factors parts you hear of, system design, my word just lost me. Anthropometrics, displays, usability, those kind of things sit in another part of the team. We also have an office called the Organizational Effectiveness Office. They work with leadership to help give them the skills they need to manage change, to lead their operations. So those aren't on my graphic because they sit in other parts of the organization. But we, within the team is the human factors part of the work. So that's where we go and we do that work. We look at the science, we go and understand what drives the operation, what changes things for the good and the bad. So do we have the right people? So who do we select? The right roles, how we design the job task, the right information. So that's where we work with the PMO, the right skills for training. All these things together affect the operation. And frequently we'll get a phone call that says something like, we have a problem in our facility because of training. And you go and start talking to the people at the building and you realize it's not a training issue, it's a leadership issue. Or it's not a leadership issue, it's a system design issue. So sometimes the levers that people think are affecting their performance, when you start to peel back the layers, it's not what they think it is. And that's where the team gets involved, trying to drive the actual causes of the behavior or the restrictions in performance, which may not be what the people at the front line always think it is as the cause. Health and well-being in the middle here is where we look at those drivers, as many of you will have seen the graphic very similar to this, that affect people's performance in the facility. Traditionally, we've shied away a little bit from this, and we've been pushing more on these areas, pardon me, to help our workforce controllers and tech ops to understand how these things affect them on a day-to-day basis. And I'll show you a little bit later in the presentation, a training success guide we put together, which kind of focuses on how these areas might affect you when you're training. But we are certainly through COVID, we've seen many of these play a part. Change in social dynamic, restrictions of seeing people, physical distancing, emotional worries and concerns. All these people affect them in the workplace. Many people don't like to accept that. And so that's been the push for us on health and well-being. How do these things affect you when you plug in? And what can we do to help you with those? And Tony at the start showed the CISM video, which I really loved. I hadn't seen that one before. And that's one of my pushes for 2022 as well, increasing our support to our controllers in those kind of events. And lastly, fatigue risk management. That's the one I'm sure we all know most about. That also falls within the human performance team. I have here at the bottom the logo for NACA, the National Air Traffic Controllers Association. That's the United States Union for the Air Traffic Controllers. They also represent some engineers or tech ops. And on the left-hand side, PASS, the union that represents many of our tech ops, ATSEPs across the country. So we work very closely with those organizations. And I'll talk a little bit more about NACA, which Guadalupe asked me to kind of focus on in a few slides so you understand what that looks like in terms of our relationship with our union. If you haven't seen these before, this is the CANSO Human Performance Standard of Excellence. There are 12 areas, and we are working our organization through understanding where we are in these levels of maturity and where we'd like to be going forward. So 2021, we've been looking through and understanding for the 12 areas in the Standard of Excellence, how mature we believe we are right now, and then identifying those activities we can do to increase our maturity going forward into 22 and beyond. If you haven't seen this before, in effect, for each of the 12 areas, you can answer a series of questions, and it will give you an understanding based on the traditional SMS categories on the right here, whether you're in formal arrangements, defined, managed, assured, or optimized, a leader. Now, I put in red at the bottom there, fatigue. As you may know, fatigue sits in the CANSA, in the SMS, not in the Standard of Excellence for Human Performance, yet that for our organization obviously is a key role for us. So I have it down there as a connected organizational activity. This is one I think I want to talk through as well, what we do and what we can't do. And I think many of you will relate to this, certainly my colleagues in human factors and human performance, is what we can achieve as a specialism. What we can certainly do is start from the end goals and work back. I think that's a skill we bring to any task we join in the agency. Whether it be a project team, a design team, a data analysis team, we're looking at where are we trying to get to and what are we trying to change? Now, how do we get there? All too often, many people's approach is you start doing something, you implement it, you throw it out there, and then we see what comes out at the end result. And that, of course, is not a good plan for organizational change. So it's starting with the Are we trying to change a behavior? Are we trying to change a performance factor? Are we trying to change a usability factor? What is it, and how do we move the organization to get there? And how do we move the people to get there? We provide advice based on science and research. I'm very lucky to be connected with my peers here on this call and other people through the CANZO Human Performance Management Working Group. For the most part, many human factors and human performance challenges, sorry, more coffee needed this morning, are the same around the world. We are trying to deal with the same issues. We're introducing the same technology, remote towers, UAS or UAVs. Commercial space is a big one for us here in the US. We've got visual scanning we look at. How do we teach scanning? How do we introduce new systems? How do we deal with fatigue? Most of those areas are common to all ANSPs, and to different extents, we experience those issues. And so it makes great sense to work together to actually try and resolve them and to learn from each other. And so I get to work with experts from across the US and across the world, and we bring that science and research that I mentioned earlier, hopefully in a way the business can apply and get and sort of clear out some of that the academics around it, which lose our users. We sponsor research, so within the team we can go and get research conducted if we know there are gaps. So this is always a tough one for us in terms of what is research. There are generally academic approaches to research are longer term, and there are some problems we face which need that longer term look, 2 year, 3 years of research, that fully structured deep analysis of a problem. And then there's the other part of research we try and address, which is very quick turnaround. We're talking high level data look, literature review, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, which is the kind of time scale you need to get research done in for it to be applied to solve a problem right in the now. And so we sponsor that research, and we conduct some of the short-term research to make sure the organization has the answers it needs. And I kind of jumped ahead actually with one of my points just coming up now, though, which is that international community and how we work together to share and not duplicate our work in solving some of those human performance problems and issues. What we can't do is give a simple yes or no, and it drives people crazy. They come to me and they want that yes, no answer. Is it safe to do this? Can I implement this? Will that be okay? Will these monitors work in the facility? And invariably the follow-up question is, what else is happening? What other changes are occurring? Are you providing training with this implementation? If you're providing training, will it be a simulator, or will it be like a briefing and a read-through? How are you going to assure the safety of this when you do make the change? So there's always those follow-up questions which lead to the, well, maybe. And I know that's a challenge for us all, and it drives some of our leadership, to challenges when we can't give those simple answers. But life is never that simple, because we can't address one issue in isolation of the others. And if you go back to that CANZO human performance model, there's 12 pieces of that jigsaw. They're all interacting with each other, and so any change in one leads to a change somewhere else. For every reaction, there's an equal and opposite reaction. That's as true in human performance. We change something here, and we didn't predict that outcome happening. And so we've got to work through all of those connected issues. Generally, the way projects are structured and managed, that is not a natural way the organization is going to look at issues, because they are funded or put in one part of the organization, and there may not be any obvious lines to another part of the organization, even though that reaction may be seen elsewhere later on. I mentioned our relationship with the union, which is very important to me, certainly for our work with the controllers. NACA is our counterpart. I actually have a full-time counterpart from NACA that works in human performance. And I put up here the language on the screen. This document is available readily online for those that want to read it. It goes through the whole bargaining unit agreement between NACA and the FAA. But to human performance, the union recognizes that we have an important human performance role, that within that we look at fatigue risk management, human factors, and health and wellness. And section 3 at the bottom there is where it says the union may designate a representative, which I do have. Now that is a very positive thing, I think, for any country that has a ANSP union relationship. This allows me to do a lot of work and activity, which without that coordination would be very hard to do. Because most of the things that I want to do within the human performance team somehow obviously touch the operation, because we're working to support the controllers, and the union, I need the union to support me. Certainly within the FAA, if an activity is not endorsed or supported by the union and human performance, it makes it very hard to go in and start asking controllers to participate and share with me and talk to me, because they know the union isn't behind this activity. That is very rare for us, because normally by the time anything we do in the human performance team goes out to the operation, we've talked about it, we've discussed it, we've compromised as needed, and we found a solution that works both for the human performance team as part of the FAA and for the union itself. We drew this diagram up during the early days of COVID. It's very similar to the diagram, the issues that were put up by Santiago earlier. But this was our look at how is the human performance going to change during the COVID time. We started early on with the kind of trying to show the organization kind of the normal, the pre-COVID issues that were there. What did we see during the early days, that crisis management time when all of us were scrambling to understand what was going on, how this would affect the operation, how it would affect us all personally, and some of those risks and changes we saw in the early drawdown days, then into the start of the ramp up, and then in the longer term return. Now we are, I would say very clearly, somewhere between near-term ramp up and long-term here in the US. We've seen massive increases in operational numbers. Certainly a couple of months ago, some of our routes were at 100%. I believe there's been a slight drop off in passengers now, certainly domestically, but the numbers internationally are going up too. So we are in that near-term to long-term ramp up, and we've taken our controllers back from their reduced schedules and put them back on the full normal schedules in the facilities. Training's resumed again in most facilities. We've returned team resource management. The teams that were divided up are now returning to work with each other again. That said, we still know our controllers face some of those work-life balance issues outside of work, and we all have varying degrees of concern about where the society is now with the pandemic. But we are seeing that return now to previous normal operations. We within the team put out various guidance documents during the pandemic to try and help educate people to be aware of. I'm sure we've all done that in different organizations. We had a human performance strategies for air traffic control in the very early days. That was focused on issues like complacency, distraction, those initial changes of loss of workload, how people are feeling, what would that do to their operational performance. Then we started to look at fatigue and alertness. And then, as we got into the new resumption of training, how will training be different when people are sitting further apart? They may be wearing masks. People have lost skill. OJTIs have lost skills and their competency. The trainees have certainly slid back in their knowledge and experience before they went into when they last trained. And so we put out information and guidance to the field through those kind of routes. We also have something in the FAA called Partnership for Safety. And that is, again, a collaborative between us and NACA. And every month within the facilities, we have local safety councils, and controllers are given a briefing by a NACA management collaboration, updating controllers and on the latest current issues, concerns, what the data is showing in different risk areas. And we in the human performance team put out a monthly topical relevant awareness for them to hand out during that briefing. And I put two examples in here, ones we've done in the last 12 months. Managing holiday stress, one we put out last November, December, on how things change. And in this case, we updated it on how things might be different during the pandemic as well. And then here on the right-hand side, things like we saw a number of issues in runway safety caused by some of the loss of skills in our pilot colleagues, and some of their worries and anxieties too about their jobs and job security, and how that was affecting them in terms of attention and alertness, and why it was important that our controllers helped to support their colleagues on the pilot side. So we do briefings like that, and we put out to the field to bring issues out there. Some of our current focus coming into 21 into 22, we're doing actigraphy studies to look at how much sleep people are getting. We are conducting a fatigue and workload study. This one is being hampered right now because of the pandemic. But when we can, we want to go out and start doing more work looking at that connectivity between people's fatigue levels, actigraphy watches, and their reported workload subjectively, and their objective actual workload based on other data we can collect and the relationships between those. The training success guide on health and well-being, I'll show you a couple of slides on that kind of very shortly. Post-incident support is another personal concern of mine. I want to push that in 2022. and that is how much help we give our controllers post-incident. And that's why I mentioned earlier how impressed I was with the CISM video that Tony showed. I think we in the FAA can do more to support our controllers post-incident. We have a very traditional approach in some areas, which is that controllers can work through some of the complications post-incident themselves. We have a CISM team. That CISM team will launch during particularly concerning events, loss of life incidents, but we don't use it as much here as other countries do in terms of day-to-day support. And we've been looking at how we support our controllers more going forward into 22 with some of those incident activities. On the human factors side, we're pushing forward next year with more training standards. Right now within the FAA, we have certification standards for trainees. What that means is as a trainee, you're nearly always being assessed against how far you are from the certification standard, which from a certification agency perspective is good. It helps us to know where trainees are and if they're getting closer. It doesn't focus the training in a trainee-focused manner on how they're progressing, what they're achieving, how good they're doing. So we're making a turn next year to switch the focus, if you like, onto how do we help focus training on a more day-to-day, how well are you developing towards the standards, rather than how far are you away from the standards. So good practice. I'm sure many organizations have standards within their organization like that. And we are going to start to morph our training forms and training processes towards that kind of approach starting next month. We're creating a human performance campaign or a portal. So working with NATCA, we are trying to identify new ways to get human performance information to our controllers and to our technicians. They generally don't, there aren't many agency connections right now to find that data. So we want to create like a controller focused and tech op focused website or app, which is usable, interesting, and actually something that controllers may want to turn to get information that we can publish, videos, self-assess, do apps, look at apps for various things from sleep through to stress. And we're working with the union to create this new portal. The Human Performance Roundtable is how we are looking to bring together all the human performance activities that go on across our organization and how we connect those together. So because of the size of the ATO, we have lots of human factors and human performance being done in different pockets of the organization. And it's time to bring that together under a collaborative activity. And so we're working together without missing potential gaps in what one side of the organization is doing against another. UAS integration into the NAS, what effect does that have on our controllers? Remote towers, again, familiar to many of you. What impact is that having? How do we manage that from a human performance perspective? We conducted some research with NASA about 2 years ago on how do you know when controllers are reaching the edge of their performance envelope? So what is it that controllers pick up on in themselves, pick up on in their colleagues, that helps them to realize I'm going under, my colleague is, we're getting overloaded, I may, if I'm not careful, start to perform worse, it's time to get help and support. And we're now rolling out some of the lessons learning from that into across the country. And we're starting to have conversations now about moving that work into controller recovery. What can we teach of that in a more structured way rather than just educational information? Can we actually embed some of that early on at the academy to allow people to recognize those things quicker? And I'll close mentioning the taxonomy in a few slides on. The training success guide I mentioned is part of our health and well-being work, and it's around us trying to help our trainees to help themselves to know what it is to manage your way through training in the organization. So like in many countries, our trainees go to the academy and get their initial training, then they go to their facilities. I would say that it's a challenging process. I would say, like many countries, I expect some of those training attitudes are very traditional. People are trained by an OJTI. That is their knowledge on which they then teach others. They have OJTIs, of course, have trainees to be OJTIs, like in virtually every country. But have we equipped our trainers to really teach and to support and to educate, or are they really more assessing, judging, and passing on information, often in the way they would train themselves? And so while we work in the organization and through the training standards, we're looking to support our OJTIs, give them more education, more training to be able to become teachers again. How do the trainees themselves help themselves? So we created this guide, and it's structured around those 8 areas of health and well-being. So you'll see across the top here, social, physical, environmental, emotional, those kind of 8 areas. And the way we've structured this guide is it tells trainees kind of at the top, high level, what the issue is, some good ideas, things they can do to help themselves, some bad ideas, things that actually won't help them at the facility. On the right-hand side here, it says the science. That column either focuses on scientific advice, scientific knowledge that kind of supports what we're saying, or in some slides, I think like my next one, it focuses on things really you need to know that the qualified controllers are saying about you or thinking about you, and why it's important you understand this concept of why you need to do something about it. And then of course, at the bottom, application to training. So this one is all about, being flexible, willing to work, being aware of what it's like to change onto a 24-hour schedule. But then you go moaning to your colleagues too early on, they're going to start to take a perspective against you. Show up late, definitely not going to work in your favor. So common sense again in many ways, but to some of our younger controllers joining the agency, some of these lessons seem to have been missed somewhere in what we think is common sense. And if they don't go in consciously understanding this, they start to get themselves put in the category of being a less ideal colleague when they're not even aware they're being judged on these things. One of our other introduction pages is around that day one arrival. The moment a trainee walks into a facility, they are being judged. The way they dress, their attitude. Are they open-minded and fun, or are they being obnoxious and arrogant? Those behaviors they may not even think about, but within days, the facility's decided how they feel about you. And you need to be managing that from the time you arrive at your facility. Other things like taking feedback. And you see on the right there from the field, now we're focused on how you're being judged on some of these things. That if you moan about feedback, you're always resisting it, arguing why it's not fair to say you weren't doing something, how that's going to come back to bite you or get you judged again. So we tried to put this out into the field to help our trainees understand how it is to go through the system. And the last thing I'll mention is the human performance taxonomy. This is based on okay, I'll come back to a second. My brain has just completely side switched. But basically looking at how do we categorize all of our data in human performance, not just through safety investigations, but through any reports filed by the controllers, any analysis we do of our data. Right now, we're in a situation where we have different taxonomies in use by different parts of the organization because of history and the way things have developed. And we're trying to pull all these together now into one new taxonomy. And so right now, the taxonomy reflects around these areas, and we're working to get all of the organization trying to use the same phraseology, the same terms for analysis, so we can directly compare those different data sources. And we have some great data sources out there, which if we mine properly, we should be able to find a lot of good trends, which we can use proactively going forward. Our ATSAP program, which is where the controllers file their safety concerns, their safety reports, has got so much data in there that I am desperate to analyze that, looking for hidden patterns in that data that will help us to predict things coming, so we can take a positive, proactive approach to these things keep showing up as underlying precursors. Let's address this now based on all those reports that have been filed historically. And by moving to a new taxonomy that keeps all the data in the one shared phraseology, I think we'll find a lot more trends in our data that will allow us to do pre-event occurrence safety activities rather than post, which Steve was talking about earlier. Okay, Tony, at that point, that's the end of my presentation. I believe I'm just on time, and I will hand back to you.
Indeed, perfect timing, and thanks again for the interesting presentation, Jason. It's a lot to take in, I think, from all of us. And with that, I would like to invite the fellow colleagues that are in the panel to switch on the cameras. So Santi, Guadalupe, and Carlos. Again, inviting all the colleagues participants to not hesitate to use the Q&A part of the application to shoot the questions, and I'll try to pass as many of them into the panel. Before we get questions from the audience, I would like to reflect on something that was bothering me when I saw these presentations with all the activities that we do in human factors, human performance, but also the reality. And somehow I think we answered through our presentation, but I put this challenging let's say, topic on the table? Is it in these days of, financial pressures, of everyone talks about machine learning, artificial intelligence, do we still need humans and human factors? Do you have, is it your job rather easy or rather difficult to push for these human factors that we presented inside your organizations? And maybe to start, while the presenters that they spoke already they can think about, I would like to invite Carlos Cavero, who is the president of the Air Traffic Control Association, ETOKAI in Spain, to give you a word of thoughts on that. Carlos.
Okay, thank you very much, Tony. Can you hear me well? Yes?
Yes, we can hear and see you well. Thank you.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much to you, Tony, and your control team, and ENAIRE, of course, for organizing this event, and particularly to give the word to the controllers by Procta, to Spanish controllers, to give our opinion and our point of view. And also, thanks to the speakers, Santiago, Stephen, Jason, and particularly Stephen, thanks for putting into words what we, the controllers, every day do think and see, even if we don't realize about it. You put it into words very accurately. Thank you very much. And regarding the question you mentioned at first, Tony, that was one thing I was thinking about. Here in this forum, we all agree the human factor is in the center of the system. We all agree that it's a fragile element with limitations, but at the same time is strong, is adaptable, is resilient, and never collapses, at least when it's working in a team. So yes, regarding the pressures of substituting the human factor, the professional, or if there are financial pressures behind, yes, that's also a question for me. Is there an alternative? I don't think so. Is there a better solution? Not yet. Let me tell you a story, short story. I don't want to, to take too much time, but just before the pandemic, I had the chance to attend a very interesting event on the first 100th anniversary of the first commercial flight in Spain. At the end of the event, the presentation, the last slide, there was a beautiful picture of a futuristic plane. The cockpit was with just one chair. And then I thought, why are we so focused on eliminating the pilots, the controllers, the professionals, if there's not an alternative, and if we have these advantages, as we mentioned before. So yes, I agree with you. There is a pressure, but so far there is not an alternative, and I believe for many years there will not be. I give the word to the rest of the.
Thank you, Carlos.
Colleagues. Thank you.
I'd like to pass to Guadalupe. She's head of the Human Factors Unit, as introduced earlier by Santi. How difficult or how easy? I mean, you must have that on you every day. How easy is to push the human factors these days, and how, because you are competing with other resources on, tools, automation, machine learning, to use the buzzwords of the day, artificial intelligence. Where do we place humans, Guadalupe?
At the center of everything. We are human beings should be placed at the center of at the main screen of the theater. Santi exposed that very well before, because and Steve, because humans, we're flexible, we're adaptable, we bring to the system the resilience that we need. And in terms of pushing human factors from the organizational point of view, now is when I need to be politically correct and say that everything is easy and I have the resources and because Santi is not listening and Ana Luis, But real life, I think Jason put it so well. This is what I do. This is what I kind of do. This is real life. And then Stephen put the scene and the science behind it. So I think we need to, let's say, minimize the gap between human factors as imagine, human factors as done. And I don't want to monopolize the floor, but this is my main message.
Thank you, Guadalupe. Stephen, I saw you switched on the camera. You want to pick up on that, but also maybe comment a bit on the reactions that you had on the chat regarding your 4 big or 5 big questions that you had.
Yeah, I switched up. I maybe switched my camera because I noticed I was mirrored. So I hope maybe that was the case through the whole talk. In which case, at least it demonstrates something, that not the thing I was trying to demonstrate, but still. The original question, I think operational staff, whether you are, again, you know, a controller or an anaesthetist or a driller or a pilot or whatever your role is, intuitively get some of this stuff, because if we're doing a good job, then we are simply reflecting back that we understand how people work and what the conditions are. But that equally applies to people in the most senior management positions and regulators. So going back to some of the responses earlier, I remember Stefan Devank said that people make decisions to maintain control in a dynamic and uncertain process, and that's absolutely true. Now, the degree of dynamism or the tempo is another matter, but that brings another problem, because while a controller, pilot, surgeon, anaesthetist, and so on has more or less almost immediate feedback, or at least within the range of usually minutes, sometimes longer, for a regulator they don't. They have less opportunity to observe the feedback or the effects of their decisions, and so that's also a difficult job. Of course, and that applies to CEOs and to even more so politicians and so on. I'm not sure if that answers the question, Tony, but that's in any case my attempt to answer it.
Thank you, Steve. I want to go to Santi and pick up, I think, on one of the comments about, you know, how you know, the scientific research of how people can contribute. I came across recently you team up with the University in Madrid for a master in safety management, and of course in that I saw in the program, you know, all the goodies of safety and human factors, and I think it's a bit of pioneering in that. Can you comment a bit on that, because that I think it shows, you know, how you can invest and how do you sponsor, for example, with the academia, the research in human factors.
Yes, thank you, Tony. I think this question goes very well with your initial question to the panel about how do we see human factors in the future, with all the constraints coming economically, but also from other things like sharing with automation, etc., etc. I think human factors are going to become increasingly critical to everything we do. The future, our ATM world is going to change in the next 10, 20 years radically. We're going to have remote towers, we're going to have digital towers. We already have them, but we're going to widely implement them. We're also going to have the aeronautical data service providers, and control from sectors will take place in a different way from what we know nowadays. All of that cannot be done without human factors being considered radically and very forcefully. Otherwise, the change will be unsuccessful. So it's very easy to advocate for human factors. And in that sense, going to the research, we need researchers to support us and help us with both ATM specific research and also thoughts coming from other sectors that have possibly gone this way regarding provision from a distance of a service and not as we know it nowadays. So we do work already with the universities here, as you well know, and we're glad to foster research and continue in that line, because we'll need it for the future. Thank you.
Tony, can I add a comment there?
Yes, please go ahead.
So I think the word pragmatic is sitting in my head as everyone's talking. I think And I think many of us on this call get this, but to be current and to help support our operation these times, what we share has got to be useful, and pick your battles. I could create a list of things I would love to change tomorrow about the way we do things in the ATO and the FAA. If I go forth with all those in tandem, I will lose, and I will not be seen as a valuable asset. I've got to pick the battle that will apply the best safety benefit or the best efficiency benefit or cost, and work on those ones. And I can listen to all the good debate and discussion and park it for my next like top 5 or whatever. I'll stick to 5. Steve likes 5s. And pick them. So be pragmatic. Work where the organization will want to hear you. And right now, that's where we should push, I think. That's not to say we lose the ones that are important, but we have to prioritize.
Totally agree. You can't find all the battles, but as you have the microphone, actually, I wanted to comment and then I ask you a question, because I think your slides, the part of the good content, that also the display, not just the FAA or HP department that you represent, but also NATCA. And I think that's an ingredient that you need to have when you want to push for these elements. How do you team up with the NATCA? And I think in ENAIRE case, the very good example is bringing the professional association into that. Can you reflect a bit on this?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in my presentation, I am very lucky to have a full-time union counterpart. What that means is we can start discussing from the initial idea. How do you feel about that? Does that immediately like make you concerned? Is that likely to be an area of resistance for NATCA or concern? If it is, why? Or what is it? Where do you see this being an area where you can't support me, or we're going to have conflicts? And how do we therefore find that middle ground? Again, that pragmatic, realistic. What can we achieve together? That said, very seldom we disagreed on anything major. We usually find a way to compromise and modify the research plan or the whatever that keeps the union happy that we're not using the data inappropriately, working with their colleagues, and meets the needs of the agency. But I think because Aaron is at our meetings from the time we even talk about the very first idea of any work we do, it's the whole plan is collaborative from the start. It's not something we bring to the union when we've already designed the research, worked out the plan, and gone, hey, what do you think? That's where you hit problems. It's too late. There's issues. You've wasted some resource.
Thank you, Jason. Sticking with that idea, involving professional associations into the work, and where possible unions. In your case, NATCA is the union. I want to ask Carlos, what are the priorities of the approach of the association and the priorities? I know you have several chair committees, professional, operational one. Few ideas of what is in the pocket of APROCTA in this year, Carlos.
Thank you, Tony. Well, we have 2 priorities in the association. Okay, the first one is to try to become what it's called Colegio Profesional in Spain. That's part of the Roman law in the Mediterranean countries, like in France or in Italy, it exists, and it's like an upgrade of a simple association. We are pushing hard to get that. We have the support of ENAIRE, we have the support of the authorities, and well, we are working on it. And at the same time, we were meeting up the other day and talking about the priorities, and well, the pandemic we have lived through mainly during this year and the last year presented a new scenario that forced us to adapt and to focus on the situation. And we have the feeling that we need to go back to work to technical issues that that are on the table, and well, the way to work on them is together with the rest of the actors, as that's what we have always tried to do. And well, that's our second priority, yes, to go back to push hard on these technical issues.
Thank you, Carlos. I want to move to Guadalupe, because she also, before taking the more managerial role in the human factor department, she was with APROCTA. She is an air traffic controller. Somebody who was an ATCO, it's always an ATCO, to comment on this aspect. Lupe.
Well, let me give you a headline for the panel. The people who do the work are the specialists in the work and are critical for system improvement. So we need to understand people as part of the system and understand the system with the people. That's something that it should be said in a practical way. What I mean with this, we have mentioned an excellent relationship with the professional association. I'm talking from the point of view as Jason put on the table, from as a human factors department, how we do interact with the controllers. So we have an excellent relationship with Caprocta, but we also have a formal relationship with other ETOKAI, which is another professional association in our fatigue and stress safety action group, and with the union. And I must say that every single project that we present to the union, to the associations, every single time they back us up. There's never a no, because they understand the importance of going, farther in human factors, in interpreting fatigue, and even when we ask for feedback from the controllers, and we get the fatigue and stress reports every time that we contact a controller. We get information, we get support. Every time that we contact representative of the union and local representatives, they support and send messages and distribute, they communicate what we are doing. So without, as Stephen Shorrock said, it's not just for the controllers, it's doing the job with the controllers, with and by the controllers. So from here, a big thanks to all the support that I get, because I couldn't do my job without, all the backup that I get every day on every single thing that I do. Honestly, it's the truth.
I say just a word, Tony. Well,
yes, Carlos, please.
Guadalupe and Enaire, thanks to you also, because you mentioned before that we have to narrow the gap in the system. And I have to say the human factors team, and you particularly, and Santi with the safety department, and Angel Luis with Enaire creating the Department of Human Factors, you are the bridge to narrow that gap. So our pleasure to collaborate, and it's thanks to you. Okay.
If I can paraphrase the Stephen slide with the changes with the people, by the people, that should be maybe a solution, and how we do it rather than for the people, to the people. Now, the next question, and I is to reflect on all members of the panel. It's in the question, in the section of the Q&A, and it's I think it will be close to the heart of all the members of the panel. The first one says, do you think it's possible that human factors, back as the sciences, depend on the cultural country differences, and that an organization implementing any human performance probably needs to explore with one's organization of its people rather than solely depending on published sciences and recommendation? And I think of no one better to start than Steve, that he's running the safety culture program of EUROCONTROL.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And thanks to whoever asked that question. The thing here is there's so many group level differences. So Spain, for instance, if we were to look at the Hofstede cultural dimensions that characterize different national cultures, Spain is roughly in the middle on the 4 dimensions, which is power distance, reasonably in the middle, a little higher than average, individualism versus collectivism, reasonably in the middle, masculinity versus femininity, which has nothing to do with being male or female, but more about more values that are more competitive versus cooperative, for instance, in the middle, if not more on the feminine side. But then uncertainty avoidance, which is our willingness to tolerate uncertainty and ambiguity, or our resistance rather, Spain is rather high, in fact, one of the highest in Europe, meaning the Spanish people in general don't like to have, according to the research, too much uncertainty, like to have more structure, like to have things known, the opposite of the Swedish in that way. So that's one point. There are cultural differences, country-based differences, but then within a culture of any nature, whether that's the ENAIRE culture or the Spanish culture or the air traffic controller culture, there are more differences. And so you will find, for instance, there's probably the ENAIRE air traffic controller has more in common with a air traffic controller from Scandinavia than with, let's say, an engineer. So it's not so simple. The really important cultures I find are more occupational or professional, where we have ways of thinking, patterns of thinking that are shared with our colleagues, and that's where this workers imagined, workers done comes in really useful in exposing those. It's not just that those at the top of organizations have a workers imagined, which is all wrong. It's that we all have it, because none of us here probably now has been, you know, the head of the regulator in Spain, for instance. But we have an imagination about how regulators work. So that's my answer. And just briefly on the human factors part, is all human factors work starts or should start with understanding who the people are, because the people that you're trying to understand, that's where the work starts, with understanding what we call the stakeholders and their situation, their context.
Thank you. Any other members of the panel want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I'd like to, please, briefly, Tony.
Jason.
So I agree with everything Steve said.
Yes, Jason.
Sorry. I agree with everything Steve said, and certainly with regards to culture and different dynamics, I agree. I think when it comes to some other areas of human factors, where it's more about our performance abilities, our ability, our reaction times, our fatigue, we don't have to worry so much about those differences. And certainly I don't have the ability to necessarily duplicate research before I apply it in the US. It's already been done in many other countries and it seems to hold. Why would I redo something to see if it holds to the US culture? However, we have that balance. We borrowed on Eurocontrol methodology of safety culture. We did have to adapt that slightly to our audience because there were some differences there. But in other areas, I'm like, it's close enough. We can go with that and apply it. The behavioral indicators work I mentioned duplicated some work done with Eurocontrol with Barry Kerwin, and we found most of the same things. When controllers get overloaded, they show the same performance envelope indicators, regardless of US, Europe. So I think we should be mindful. Yes, it's good sometimes to be aware of that, but if we can't always have the time or resources to duplicate. Can we draw enough conclusion and use that research rather than just to bypass it? So I think both.
Thank you, Jason. Maybe moving on the next question, and I like to invite something with his engineering background. One of the questions here in the panel of Q&A says, with the mention of the buzzwords such artificial intelligence and the desired incorporation of AI into assistant position to actors, do you then foresee there is a critical field of human factors that relate to AI trust and retrust? Now human factors are no longer just about human-human, but increasing into human-machine. I know you need to take your crystal ball out.
Yes.
Answer that question.
I think it's a bit what I tried to express before. And our world's going to change radically. Artificial intelligence is one of the buzzwords, and it's one of the main players. But I don't think any, or at least in our environment in Spain and Europe, I don't think anyone's considering to substitute the human being. I think we're all worried about how we get it right with the human factor, not in the middle. I mean, a remote tower, a digital tower will be cheaper in the long run than having these big things we have at airports now. You don't have to have all the maintenance, etc. So there is a business case, and that's what moves the world, a business case. But no one's considering giving remote control without controllers. And all our work in that sense is getting the human right into the middle, and as Guadalupe says, providing the resilience that all these new gadgets or artificial intelligences bring, but the human is key to making them work. And that's why I mentioned before, I think for us, or at least in the case of ENAIRE, it's very easy to foster promotion of human factors as a key element to our survival as an organization.
Thank you, Santi. I would reflect the same question first to Luke and then to Carlos as the bridge and the end user. this mix of how do we integrate this all automation and AI with the air traffic controllers.
Yes, well, Tony, thank you for that. I think that we still need to cope with acceptance, because technology allows us to use autonomous cars already. We could use them and we still drive. We could use planes without pilots, but we still have pilots. We could have, why not, remote towers without controllers, but we still have controllers. So this is still a debate, not about what technology is able to do. It's about what society and what we want the technology to do. It's about, and I think that's a good debate. The other one that I wanted to continue what Steve mentioned about culture has to do also with culture here. How comfortable we are, depending on our culture, about a machine doing things for us. And I have in mind probably, Asian societies, but they are more probably familiar with every single thing they do. And it comes to my mind when I visited Singapore with friends like 10 years ago, maybe. They already used, or maybe more, they already had this, fantastic application, mobile application, where you could call for a taxi, called Uber. And we didn't even know what that was at that time here in Spain. And it was like, wow, so so they were so used to it, like, part of their daily lives. And I think that's a cultural side of it. Steve mentioned the national culture and, of course, the air traffic controllers culture. And within the air traffic controllers culture, still, in our case, and I want to mention that in relation to culture, for example, the tower controller versus the air traffic control from center controller, even within shifts, when you work in a shift with the same people, you have, this is a group, very close group, that once you get in, you need to be that kind of non-formal approval to be one of those people. So there's a lot of different within cultures, within the culture label. So I'm not able to foresee the future, but I think we're going to be still playing a crucial role for the next, I would say, 30 to 50 years. But what else after that, I have no idea.
Thank you, Luca. Carlos?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I agree. I don't have a crystal ball, but I can say that today we don't have, I'd like to point out one difference. We don't have artificial intelligence. We have assisted intelligence. And the second point is that I agree that technology is a complex part of the system, but it seems like sometimes, I'm giving my personal opinion now, that the controllers, we are struggling very often against or adapting to the technology. And the reason why, and it's one of the teachings I think we may got from this period, from the pandemic, a period when we stopped, we had time to think and time to focus our priorities in aviation, is that in technology, we all have, as in the whole system, we all have to work together. And particularly with the remote or digital towers or with any other solution, the professionals from any field, I mean, engineers, controllers, pilots, and technicians, we all have to work together from the very first stages. Then if we participate all together in the developing, in final tests and until it's implemented, the technology will be a successful. I'm totally sure for that. One of the actions in the association we took in collaboration with EUROCONTROL during the last year was that we launched a questionnaire, and there were about 400 controls participating, almost 1/3 of the 1/4 of the controllers in ENAIRE. And in the answers, one of the most common points was to try to solve or modify technology solutions we were working on every day, because we tend to adapt, but we are not totally happy with them. So that's the present, but for the future, it works even more. And well, that's the way I see the technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Maybe just one reflection on this from my side. And thanks to the introduction of Steve, we met people at IBM, and they have in their artificial intelligence and machine learning called Watson. They are looking how to make it more trustworthy and involving, system thinking and human factors. And that's interesting because all these big software houses like IBM, Amazon, Apple, you name it, Google, and they start looking into the human factors when they look into artificial intelligence. And I think that's good news. The second thing that I wanted to comment on that is that probably we will be facing, artificial intelligence, it's a buzzword. I know how much AI is in the reality today. But we already seen with the automation, and I want to come back to this big event that was hosted in Madrid 2 years ago. And in fact, we talk a lot about, human factors integration in the ATM system and with automation, because I think with the AI will be the same. We'll be, in front of our screens or flying our planes, and then the machine will start behaving in a matter that we do not understand. It said what is going to do now and what is going to do next, and so forth. So having said that, I think we have about 8 minutes, and I want to maybe address the last question that we have, and then give to the panelists final word to pass it to the attendees. Access guide that you presented. This is regarding the trainee success guide. I was wondering, will it be some kind of normalizing? And I'm sure the shown slides aren't everything of a success guide, but it would be great if there is more empowerment given to the trainee, and then it comes with an example. Or that when the trainee gets continuous poor feedback or very mixed feedback, how can trainees self-regulate or seek clarification in a helpful manner? Can you shed some light, Jason, on that?
Yes, absolutely. You're right. That was just a couple of slides of the guide. There's a lot more to it, and it's designed to be a very honest and frank guide for trainees on how things work. Certainly, it is true that there are discriminating practices out there. OJTIs form opinions very early on, as all humans do, and there's a risk of that affecting them. Part of the training standards work is not to design the standards, but it's to reteach the whole training community how to use those in that positive, constructive light, how to work against those biases. But I think right now, weakness in our system, we have on our training forms a place where the trainee is supposed to write their comments about the training session and sign it. And I think if you ask most trainees, they would tell you, if you write something there, it's going to cause you problems. Just say all good and sign it. And so we're not getting that feedback because it's discouraged. That's not all facilities, that in some places. And we need to have a route where trainers and the training community understand that trainee feedback is a good thing. It is positive to hear how you're doing as a trainer, and you can use that to your advantage. It shouldn't be seen as threatening. And I think that's a culture we need to address as part of our training standard move, that it's okay to have that feedback and it's okay for a trainee to speak up. However, what we are also seeing is trainees who, if they don't like the OJTI, they interpret that negative, they ask for a change of training team. You have to learn to get on with people you work with. You can't always ask to move training teams because you don't like the person you're training with. You've got a professionalism there. I may not like you, but I can still work with you professionally. And I think we need to ingrain that a little bit more in some of both sides to understand it's not a likeness thing. We're professionals. Work through that and worry about whether you like someone outside of the workplace.
Thank you, Jason. And now I want to pass to each member of the panel for a final reflection on human factors and whatever else you want to pass it at the end. Stephen, maybe we start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. I guess the thing I'd really emphasize is that point I made about the interfaces and really focusing attention on the interfaces. There's a difference between, the two kinds of what we call social capital or trust. And one is a bonding social capital within teams, within tight-knit units, within tight-knit communities. It keeps us together. That's where we pay a lot of attention. And the other is the bridging social capital between groups, between people who are not of like mind. And that's where I would say focus your attention. Look out for the connectors among you that have that ability. And in particular, pay attention to your engineers, because they are going to need a lot of your help. Their jobs are changing enormously, beyond imagination, and they are going to need a lot of, a lot of support.
Thank you, Steve. We move to Santi.
Thank you, Tony. I'd first like to thank my co-panelists for extremely interesting presentations, both the more scientific one from Steve and the more operational one from Jason. Picking up on Steve's words, he mentioned start with what is strong. I would like to emphasize that we're going that way at ENAIRE. This last year, we've created a group of controllers to observe normal day operations and to work on what we find is strong. And it's something we're promoting both nationally and at European level, led by a colleague, Alberto Rodríguez de la Flor. And it's something we feel very proud of. So we want to work with what is strong. And to finalize, just as a manager, my job is to make things easy, make it easy for things to go right. So I hope what with the human factor units are working hard on change, on stress, on fatigue, on well-being, plus looking at what is strong in our system, we can continue to provide and even improve safety levels. Thank you.
Thank you, Santi. We move to Guadalupe.
Hi, Tony. If you allow me, I would like to use these moments to bring the voice of the Cancer Human Performance Management Working Group. I'm the chair of that group, and there's two big ideas that we share in common. A lot of representatives in a lot of industry reps and a lot of ANSPs. By the way, Jason is also part of that group. Human performance must be elevated to the same priority as safety and operational performance, so that the ATM industry can remain viable and sustainable. This need has been re-emphasized by the announcement from the US Senate last year. I think it was last year, Jason, remember me, to reform aviation with a greater focus on human factors and a lot of budget on that. This has been supported by other global efforts and institutions, the European Human Dimensions Working Group, ICAO, and the European Union Aviation Safety Agency. And my last message is, again, I'm going to say again, effective human performance is required to deliver good air traffic and management and to keep the system safe, efficient, and effective. Adaptability and flexibility is necessary. It is the people in the system that provide this resilience. So people create safety. That's it.
Thank you, Lupe. I'll move to Carlos before I finish with Jason, our friend across the pond. Carlos.
Thank you.
And again,
Tony.
my personal thanks for involvement with ETOKAI. And if I can announce as a commercial break our event in November in Zaragoza, but I let that to you, please.
Well, yes. Well, thank you for your continuous support and Eurocontrol. Yes, we will hold in, hopefully, a presential meeting in Zaragoza, but this time related to just culture, which is one very interesting field. We are moving forward. Yes, and yes, and just the last few words. I wanted to move a little bit from theory to practice because. As we did the other day, the 10 principles for safety from the network manager. And I think this document deserves to be in every tower, in every ops room, in every office, because it's really theory. We know it, and it's a great document. But we also at the same time have to put the means to put that in practice. And Santiago mentioned the project, the observatory, which is not a project, it's a reality, of safety and efficiency, which is putting that theory into practice and moving forward. And the human factors department from Guadalupe, they are working hard. And we have challenges ahead. We are moving, but in practice, but we still have issues of fatigue. We talked about technology and automation. We have to work together. There's a good moment to invest on training. We have learned that everything changes, everything is dynamic, nothing is static, and we have to be trained. We have to work together. We have to be flexible. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Jason, the last views from across the pond.
Thank you, Tony. So I'll close with just reminding, I know thanks to the panel, I've enjoyed being here. We all know the importance of human factors and human performance. Not everyone around us always does. We have to remember to be pragmatic. We are often the ears and the eyes, I think, of people in the operation. We know what we have to understand what our controllers and our ADCEPs are facing. And then we translate that into what the business needs to get the performance it wants, whilst being mindful of the business's needs. And those needs, we're one of the few groups of specialisms, I think, that have to be mindful of all the ends, the user as well as the business, the efficiency, the safety, the different drivers. Many other organizations within parts of an organization focus on parts of that. We have to understand all those levers to actually be successful. And it can be disheartening at times. So I say to my team all the time, imagine the decision they would have made if we weren't in that room. We just nudged it a little bit differently, and that made a difference. And so I think those things are why we're there. We have to remember that sometimes we have big wins, other times they're little, but it's making a difference in the right direction.
With that words of great wisdom, I'd like to thank all the panelists, the distinguished panelists. Amazing job, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you, the participants. Thank you for staying also in these big numbers after a long session. I will inform you that after that, we will have use of your 3 to 5 minutes. We'll send a feedback form so we can improve and do better, and invite you to follow us in the next day. So tomorrow we'll follow with the Spanish sessions. Actually, the same morning it's replicated in the afternoon, so people on shift in ENAIRE can follow them. But also those who are not mastering Spanish language, I was told that Guadalupe will speak slowly in Spanish, so everyone will understand, including myself. So it's all about the stress and fatigue. In 2 sessions replicated. Then on 29th we come back on human factors webinar on human capabilities and limitations. On Thursday on the 13th it's about the eTOKAI tool, and then the last day with the help of Nathan Ding from EUROCONTROL we discussed the human performance back to normal, a delicate balance of well-being, pressure and safety. So I'll give you a rendezvous tomorrow at 10:30 at Madrid time. And thank you everyone for being with us today. Thank you.